how many students are stepping into debt without fully realizing what it means for their future? I know because I've seen friends struggle, and honestly, I almost made the same mistakes myself. The purpose of this video is simple to break that cycle. I'm going to walk you through smarter money moves every student should know before borrowing a single dollar. By the end, you'll have practical strategies to protect your financial future and avoid the debt trap that holds so many people back. When it comes to student loans, the biggest issue is that most students don't actually see the full picture of what they are committing to. The problem is simple but devastating. Borrowing money for education feels like a short-term solution, but the long-term consequences are often invisible until it's too late. A high school graduate signing loan documents is often only 17 or 18 years old. They are excited about college, focused on getting into the right program, and hearing the constant message that education is an investment. What they don't realize is that the moment they accept those funds, they are essentially signing a contract that will follow them for years or even decades. The hidden cost isn't just in the repayment amount, it's in the stress, the financial limitations, and the lost opportunities that come when a large portion of future income goes to debt instead of building a life. Many students don't know the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans. They don't realize how interest grows, and they don't calculate what their monthly payments will actually look like after graduation. This lack of awareness is what makes the problem so widespread, because if people truly understood the weight of student loan debt, fewer would borrow without a clear plan. The solution to this problem starts with shifting the mindset before borrowing. Instead of treating student loans as free money that you'll worry about later, you need to think of them as a purchase decision. Just like you would compare the cost of a car or a house, you have to compare the cost of the degree with the potential return it gives you. This means researching average starting salaries in your chosen field, estimating what your loan repayment would look like based on your borrowing amount, and asking the tough question, is the degree worth the cost? If the numbers don't line up, that doesn't mean you have to give up on your education. It means you need to make smarter moves. This could include starting at a community college for the first 2 years, choosing an in-state school instead of an expensive private one, or working part-time to reduce borrowing. Another key solution is educating yourself on interest and repayment options before signing any paperwork. Many schools have financial aid advisors who can walk you through the numbers, and there are countless online calculators that show what your monthly payments will be depending on how much you borrow. When you know the reality up front, you can avoid the shock that so many graduates experience later. To make this more concrete, let's look at an example. Imagine two students, Alex and Jordan. Alex goes to an out-of-state university, borrows $40,000 over 4 years without really paying attention to interest, and graduates with a monthly payment of about $400. Jordan, on the other hand, decides to attend a community college for 2 years before transferring to an in-state university, cutting total costs nearly in half. Jordan also works part-time on campus, covering books and living expenses without borrowing extra money. At graduation, Jordan owes $18,000 with a monthly payment closer to $200. Both students get the same degree in the end, but Alex is starting adult life with a heavy financial burden while Jordan has flexibility to save, invest, or even move to a new city for opportunities. The difference isn't in their intelligence or ambition, it's in the decisions they made before borrowing. What this shows is that the hidden cost of student loans is not unavoidable, but it requires awareness and intentional planning. Most students don't realize that small choices add up to massive differences later. Choosing a cheaper school, borrowing only for tuition instead of living expenses, or picking up a part-time job can shave off tens of thousands of dollars in repayment. The problem is students don't get told this up front. They are encouraged to focus on the dream of college and worry about repayment later. But if you take the time to understand the long-term cost before you borrow, you can protect yourself from financial stress and start building your life on stronger ground instead of debt. One of the most overlooked problems students face before borrowing money for school is not having a clear budget in place. Without a budget, it's almost impossible to know how much money you actually need to borrow versus how much you simply want in order to feel comfortable. The issue is that many students end up borrowing for not just tuition and fees, but also for everyday living expenses, entertainment, and even lifestyle upgrades that aren't essential. When you think about it, this means someone might be taking on thousands of dollars of debt just to cover coffee runs, new clothes, or off-campus housing when cheaper options were available. This creates a dangerous cycle because the more you borrow, the higher your interest, and the longer it takes to pay back. The problem is magnified by the fact that many students are managing their own money for the first time, so they don't have a system for tracking income and expenses. Without that system, every loan disbursement feels like a windfall, and it's easy to overspend, thinking repayment is years away. By the time graduation comes around, that lack of budgeting has snowballed into thousands of unnecessary debt dollars. The solution to this problem is surprisingly simple but requires discipline, building a budget before you borrow. Instead of waiting until loans are disbursed and trying to figure it out on the fly, students should sit down and create a realistic financial plan for the entire school year. This starts with writing down fixed costs like tuition, fees, and books, followed by estimating necessary living expenses like rent, food, and transportation. Once these essentials are outlined, you can clearly see the total cost of attending school for a semester or a year. Then you can compare this number with available income sources such as family support, part-time work, scholarships, or grants. The key step is identifying the exact gap, the minimum amount you truly need to borrow to cover only the essentials. Anything beyond that is optional, and borrowing extra just for convenience is what traps students in long-term debt. To make this work, students also need to practice small budgeting habits, such as tracking expenses weekly, using budgeting apps designed for students, and setting spending limits for non-essential categories. This doesn't mean you can't enjoy your college experience. It means you are enjoying it without building unnecessary financial stress for your future self. Take the example of Sarah and Mike, two students who both attend the same university with the same tuition cost of $20,000 a year. Sarah doesn't create a budget, so when she gets her student loan refund check, she uses it to rent a nicer apartment off campus, eat out several times a week, and upgrade her laptop. By the end of the year, she has borrowed $28,000 because she included lifestyle expenses in her loans. Mike, on the other hand, sits down before the semester starts and calculates his costs. He realizes his tuition, fees, and basic living expenses total about $20,000, and he gets $30,000 from a part-time campus job. That means he only needs to borrow $17,000, which is $11,000 less than Sarah. Over 4 years, Sarah ends up with over $40,000 in debt compared to Mike, and because of interest, she will be paying back significantly more. The difference came down to one choice: creating a budget before borrowing. Mike limited his loans to essentials, while Sarah allowed lifestyle choices to expand her debt. This example shows how powerful budgeting can be in controlling debt. It's not just about pinching pennies, it's about making intentional financial decisions that directly affect your future. By taking the time to calculate costs and stick to a budget, students can prevent themselves from borrowing more than necessary. The problem isn't that student loans exist, it's that many students approach them without a financial plan. By having a budget in place, you give yourself clarity, control, and a realistic path forward instead of letting loans dictate your financial future. Another major problem students face when preparing for college is overlooking the opportunities that come from grants, scholarships, and other forms of free money. The issue here is that loans are advertised and pushed far more aggressively than scholarships, and many students believe that financial aid automatically means loans. This creates a mindset where borrowing becomes the default choice, and students skip over the effort of applying for funding that doesn't need to be repaid. The problem is also tied to the belief that scholarships are only for straight-A students or athletes, which is simply not true. There are thousands of scholarships available for different skills, interests, backgrounds, and even unusual hobbies, but many go unclaimed each year because students don't take the time to search and apply. This results in unnecessary debt because every dollar not covered by scholarships or grants is a dollar borrowed with interest. On top of that, students often underestimate how much free money they could realistically access if they were consistent about applying, and they miss out on thousands in savings because they assume it's too competitive or not worth the effort. The solution to this problem is to prioritize free money before turning to loans. Students should adopt the mindset that scholarships and grants are essentially discounts on their education, and the more they collect, the less debt they will carry into the future. Instead of filling out 1 or 2 scholarship applications and giving up, they should treat the process like a part-time job. Setting aside even a few hours a week to research and apply can add up significantly over time. There are scholarships for academic merit, community service, leadership, specific majors, minority groups, financial need, and even quirky categories like writing an essay on a specific topic or creating a short video. Grants, especially federal and state ones, are also underutilized because students don't always fill out the FAFSA early or accurately, and they miss the chance to qualify. The key solution is consistency, applying widely, meeting deadlines, and stacking as many scholarships as possible instead of assuming loans are inevitable. Students who maximize free money before borrowing not only save thousands in repayment, but also develop a sense of financial responsibility and initiative that benefits them long after graduation. Consider the example of Emma and Chris, two students from the same high school with similar grades and backgrounds. Emma believes scholarships are too competitive, so she fills out the FAFSA, accepts the federal loans offered, and doesn't look much further. She borrows $25,000 for her degree, planning to deal with repayment after graduation. Chris, on the other hand, treats scholarships like a mission. He applies to local community foundation awards, departmental scholarships at his university, and niche programs he finds online. He doesn't win every one, but by being persistent, he secures $2,500 there, and even a $5,000 in renewable award from a national program. By the end of his first year, Chris has reduced his borrowing needs by $10,000. Over 4 years, this approach saves him over $30,000 in loans, not including the interest he avoids. Emma and Chris graduate with the same degree, but Emma faces hundreds of dollars in monthly repayments, while Chris starts his career with a much lighter financial burden. The difference was not ability or intelligence, it was the willingness to seek out free money instead of defaulting to debt. This example highlights the reality that scholarships and grants are more accessible than most students think, but they require effort and persistence. The problem is not that opportunities don't exist, but that students often underestimate them or fail to take action. By prioritizing free money before loans, students can dramatically cut down their debt load and put themselves in a stronger financial position. Every scholarship, no matter how small, adds up, and when combined, they can make the difference between graduating with a manageable debt level or being stuck with repayments that limit future choices. You said IN Kawaya no. Exped ITNTO 600 words yid ADDNDN just don't ADN ADMGS GPT said. A common problem with student borrowing is that many people take out more money than they actually need, often without realizing the long-term impact. Loans are typically offered in lump sums that look generous, and because repayment feels so far away, it's tempting to accept the full amount. The issue is that students often borrow for convenience rather than necessity, using loans to fund upgraded housing, frequent dining out, or lifestyle purchases that have nothing to do with education. This behavior not only inflates the total debt, but also increases the interest accrued over time. For many students, the difference between borrowing only what is required and taking the maximum amount offered can mean tens of thousands of dollars in extra repayment. The root of the problem lies in the lack of financial education. Students don't always realize that every extra borrowed dollar comes with years of repayment attached, and once the money is accepted, it's easy to justify spending it without restraint. The solution to this problem is adopting the principle of borrowing only what you need. This means calculating the true cost of your education by identifying fixed expenses such as tuition, books, fees, and basic living costs, then subtracting any income sources like part-time jobs, parental support, scholarships, or grants. The difference between those numbers is the amount you should consider borrowing, not the total amount offered by the lender. Students need to treat loan offers with caution and resist the urge to take the maximum available, remembering that a loan is not free money, but a financial responsibility. One effective strategy is to think of every dollar borrowed as costing more than its face value because of interest over time. This mental shift helps students pause before borrowing extra for things they could instead budget for or earn through work. Another practical step is returning unused loan money within the school's refund period, which reduces the balance and prevents unnecessary debt. By borrowing with precision, students protect their future selves from heavier repayments and create financial flexibility after graduation. Take the example of Brian and Lisa, two students with similar tuition costs of $15,000 a year. Both are offered up to 20 years older in loans per year. Brian accepts the full amount because he likes the idea of having extra money for living off campus, buying new electronics, and covering weekend outings. By graduation, he has borrowed $80,000 even though his actual educational costs were much lower. Lisa, on the other hand, carefully calculates her needs. She realizes tuition, books, and rent total of $15,000, and she earns $3,000 annually from a part-time job. She only borrows $12,000 a year, enough to cover the gap. After 4 years, Lisa's total debt is for $48,000, which is $32,000 less than Brian. Because of interest, the real difference in repayment will be even greater, costing Brian years of extra work and thousands in added payments. The striking part is that both had the same opportunity, but one treated loans as spending money while the other saw them as a last resort for necessities. This example demonstrates how easy it is for borrowing to spiral out of control when students take more than they need. The problem is not that loans exist, but that many treat them casually, accepting maximum amounts without considering the long-term burden. By making a conscious choice to borrow only the essentials, students set themselves up for far greater financial freedom. Even small reductions in borrowed amounts can add up to massive savings over the life of the loan. The discipline to reject unnecessary debt may feel restrictive in the moment, but it creates a future where financial stress is minimized and opportunities remain open instead of being weighed down by repayment obligations. Another major problem students encounter is relying solely on loans without considering how earning money during school could reduce their financial burden. Too many students view college as a time when working should take a backseat, assuming that any form of employment will distract them from their studies. As a result, they borrow money to cover living expenses, meals, and extras that could have been managed with part-time income. The problem here is not just the size of the debt, but also the mindset it creates. Loans become the default safety net, and students miss the chance to build financial responsibility early on. What many don't realize is that even modest income during school can significantly offset borrowing, reduce the total interest owed, and help build skills and habits that benefit them in the job market later. Ignoring income opportunities leaves students more dependent on debt and less prepared for financial independence after graduation. The solution lies in developing side hustles or income streams while studying. This doesn't mean working full-time and sacrificing academic success. It means finding manageable, flexible ways to earn extra money that directly reduces reliance on loans. Campus jobs, tutoring, freelancing online, a gig economy work, or even starting small businesses are all viable options that fit around a student's schedule. The key is choosing work that contributes without overwhelming. A student who earns even $200 to $300 a month can cover food, books, or transportation, which prevents those expenses from being added to loan balances. Beyond the money, working while in school also builds time management, discipline, and professional experience, making graduates more attractive to employers. Students who commit to side hustles often discover that the sense of financial control reduces stress and gives them confidence in handling money. Instead of graduating with the mindset that debt is normal, they leave with skills and experience that make them less reliant on borrowing in the future. For example, consider Daniel and Maria, two students with similar backgrounds and tuition costs. Daniel chooses not to work during school, believing his time is better spent focusing on academics. To cover rent, meals, and personal expenses, he borrows an additional $8,000 a year on top of tuition loans. After 4 years, his debt has grown to over $32,000 beyond tuition, making his total balance overwhelming. Maria takes a different approach. She tutors high school students in math 3 evenings a week, earning about $250 a month, and picks up small freelance projects online during holidays. Over the course of a year, she earns nearly $4,000, which covers books, groceries, and some personal expenses. As a result, she doesn't borrow beyond tuition and saves herself from adding tens of thousands to her student loan balance. Both Daniel and Maria graduate with degrees, but Daniel faces years of repayments for expenses that could have been avoided, while Maria's manageable debt allows her to start saving and investing right away. This example shows how powerful even small streams of income can be in shaping a student's financial future. The problem of ignoring work opportunities doesn't just inflate debt, it also robs students of the chance to practice financial independence before graduation. The solution isn't about working yourself to exhaustion, but about being strategic and intentional, choosing side hustles that fit your schedule and goals. By earning while learning, students lighten their reliance on loans, avoid unnecessary borrowing, and step into postgraduate life with both less debt and more valuable experience. Even a few $100s a month during school can be the difference between feeling trapped by debt or starting adulthood with flexibility and financial confidence. One of the biggest problems students face with borrowing is not fully understanding how interest and repayment actually work. For many, loans feel abstract during college years because repayment doesn't begin until after graduation. This creates a false sense of security where students think of debt as distant and manageable, without realizing how quickly interest can grow. For unsubsidized loans, interest often starts accruing the moment the loan is disbursed, meaning the balance is increasing even while the student is still in school. By the time repayment begins, the total owed is often higher than the original borrowed amount. Another common issue is that students rarely calculate what their monthly payments will look like relative to their expected income after graduation. Without this perspective, they enter the workforce unprepared for the financial strain of large payments that eat into their budget. Not understanding these mechanics turns repayment into a surprise, and instead of building wealth early in their careers, graduates end up scrambling to manage obligations they could have anticipated. The solution to this problem is education and proactive planning. Students need to learn the basics of how loan interest works, the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans, and how repayment options affect long-term costs. One step is to use loan calculators that project repayment amounts based on borrowing levels and interest rates. This gives a clear picture of what future monthly obligations will look like and allows students to compare them against the average salary in their chosen field. Another solution is to make small interest payments while still in school. Even paying $20 or $30 a month can prevent interest from piling onto the balance, saving hundreds or thousands over the life of the loan. Students should also educate themselves on repayment plans, such as income-driven repayment, which adjusts payments based on income, or standard repayment plans, which clear the debt faster but require larger monthly commitments. Understanding these options early allows students to make informed decisions and avoid being blindsided after graduation. Take the example of James and Olivia, who both borrow $30,000 for their degrees. James doesn't pay attention to how interest works, assumes repayment will be manageable, and makes no payments while in school. By graduation, his loan balance has grown by nearly $3,000 due to accumulated interest. When repayment begins, he owes more than he expected, and his monthly bill of nearly $350 feels overwhelming compared to his entry-level salary. Olivia takes a different approach. She researches repayment plans during school and uses an online calculator to estimate her monthly payments. She realizes that even a small effort could make a difference. So she commits to paying $25 a month toward her loan's interest while studying. By graduation, her balance is the same $30,000 she borrowed, not inflated by interest. When repayment starts, her monthly bill is lower and she feels prepared because she had already budgeted for it. The contrast between James and Olivia shows how awareness and small actions can drastically change the financial burden of student loans. This example illustrates that the problem isn't only the amount students borrow, but the lack of understanding about how repayment works. By ignoring interest accrual and repayment planning, students end up with more debt than necessary and greater stress after graduation. The solution is not complicated, but it requires initiative, learning the basics of loans, making small proactive payments if possible, and preparing for repayment before it begins. These steps turn borrowing from a financial trap into a manageable responsibility. When students understand how interest grows and what repayment will realistically look like, they are far less likely to feel overwhelmed and far more likely to maintain control over their financial future. Now first, we looked at the hidden cost of student loans and why they feel easy up front, but become a heavy burden later. Second, we talked about building a budget before borrowing so you don't end up financing lifestyle choices with debt. Third, we focused on grants and scholarships, free money that should always be your first option. Fourth, we stressed the importance of borrowing only what you actually need. Fifth, we highlighted how side hustles and part-time income streams can cut loan dependence. And finally, we broke down how understanding interest and repayment plans keeps you from being blindsided after graduation. If you found this valuable, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment sharing your biggest takeaway. And stay tuned for the next video, Debt-Free Graduation, How Students Are Paying for College Without Loans.